Hello and welcome to this self-publishing advice conference session from the Alliance of Independent Authors. I'm Adam Croft from the Indie Author Mindset and I'm the host of this session, the title of which is Going Wide, How to Sell More Books in More Formats on More Platforms. We're going to be looking briefly at the main arguments for going wide, what the benefits are of being wide, and what's actually possible when you're wide in 2020. And I'll give you a clue, it's more than you think. We're also going to look at some of the myths that have been perpetuated over the years, and I'll debunk those once and for all before we move on to covering how you can sell more books on retailers outside of Amazon and set yourself up for a lucrative long-term career in independent publishing. I will just say at this point, the day on which I'm recording this is extraordinarily windy. So if you do hear any weird noises, I do apologise. There's not a whole lot I can do about that in terms of stopping the weather. But we will move on now, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself. First things first then, who am I? Well, my name is Adam Croft. I am Ally's Wide Advisor and a partner member. I think Wide Advisor is a reference to going wide in the book sense and not to my body shape, but that could go either way. I've had more than 2 million downloads of my books, which are crime thrillers, psychological thrillers and mysteries. They have achieved between them 7 store-wide Amazon number ones in the US, the UK, Australia and Canada. And I am probably known as a pretty prominent advocate of going wide, and I even actually dissolved a publishing contract with Amazon Publishing a couple of years ago due to the restrictive nature of KU exclusivity. I am very much in favour of going wide and not a fan of the exclusivity clause, but more on that in a little bit. My publishing history, my background is that I published my first book in 2010, and I did that via Smashwords. Do you remember them? I went into KDP Select when Kindle Unlimited was launched in 2014, and I left it less than a year later, actually, in the summer of 2015, and went wide via Draft to Digital. And since then, since 2016, I've been direct with Apple, Kobo, Barnes & Noble and Google Play. And I do use D2D for the other vendors. So if you're thinking of going wide, if you're not yet convinced, why should you do it? Personally, I break it down into 3 arguments. I'll break it down to the ethical, business and future arguments. These are all interlinked. They're all connected, but if you look at it in those 3 ways, I find that can be helpful. I want to point out at this point that I am definitely not anti-Amazon. I know a lot of people can see it that way because I'm in favour of going wide, and the reason for doing so is because of Amazon's exclusivity clause when it comes to KDP Select, but that does not make me anti-Amazon in any way whatsoever. I use them all the time. I have a great relationship with them. I've got no issue with Amazon themselves, just the restrictive nature of KU when it comes to authors. Personally, I'm a pretty forward-thinking person, and I can see that this isn't going to end well unless Amazon either end the exclusivity demand in KU enrolment or at the very least introduce a non-exclusive tier of KU enrolment, which I think would be a good halfway house and a good way forward for everybody. Let's have a look at the ethical, business and future arguments then. In terms of ethics, this is personal preference, I guess, for lots of authors. It mostly surrounds the exclusivity clause that I mentioned. Being in Kindle Unlimited means you're not allowed to sell your books anywhere else. You're effectively handing Amazon a monopoly. Can you imagine if Netflix told Steven Spielberg he couldn't show his movies in cinemas or on the TV? Or if Spotify told Ed Sheeran he couldn't have his music up on iTunes or play live gigs anymore? That approach is unsustainable for everybody but Amazon. An Amazon monopoly on publishing will benefit nobody other than them. Even authors will suffer in the long term because once the industry is KU dependent, Amazon will have full control. And this is not an Amazon dig. I don't have an issue with Amazon. It's not good for anybody to control any industry. And that is a business argument in itself, which leads me on to the others. that putting all of your eggs in one basket is a bad idea. I've been running small businesses all my life, really, and this has always been true. Having one client isn't ideal business sense, particularly if that client has unfortunately proven themselves to be pretty unreliable in the past. It's also true that 95% of the world's readers are outside of the UK and the US. There are 190 other countries that aren't the UK and the US, and the vast majority of the world population just doesn't really even have access to Amazon sometimes, and it's certainly not the biggest retailer in most of those countries. There are bigger gains to be had outside of Amazon. Trying to make progress on Amazon these days in 2020 is difficult, as I'm sure you will all know. Advertising is expensive, mainly because everybody is trying to aim for Amazon US and Amazon UK sales. Advertising, therefore, is cheaper because you're not fighting for the same overfished pond, and you can grow your sales faster outside of Amazon than you can on Amazon itself, especially if you approach it in the right way and follow the tips and advice that I'm going to be giving you today. When it comes to looking forward into the future, I think it's fair to say that an Amazon monopoly, or anybody having a monopoly, could lead to a dire future for authors. Prices are driven down. They already are being driven down. We're already seeing readers expecting that books should be free or should be 99p, which is completely unsustainable for authors as things move forward. We're seeing now that people are having to write a book a month or a book a week just to stay afloat, which isn't sustainable in the long term whatsoever. As I mentioned earlier, a world in which one company controls the industry means they can decide what royalties are paid to authors. They can control whichever aspects they wish, as we've given them complete control by feeding that machine. Again, not an Amazon dig. This would be the same if there was any company having a monopoly over publishing. That is the aspect that is not healthy. So, when it comes to going wide, what is possible? Lots of people hear lots of things about going wide, and they don't necessarily know what's involved and what's possible. This here is a bit of a screenshot from my Kobo Writing Life dashboard. On Kobo alone, I've sold books in 120 countries just in the English language. Kobo has an extraordinary reach. Far bigger than Amazon's actually when it comes to the corners of the world in which it operates. Whereas Amazon has put everything into dominating the US and the UK, Kobo has gone for all those other markets. It's the biggest in Canada, much bigger than Amazon, and it's a huge operator in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and much of Europe as well. When you look at Google Play, they're making huge, enormous inroads in the Indian subcontinent, where reading is growing massively in India, in Bangladesh, in Pakistan. It's well worth thinking, well outside of our UK-US bubble, which we have been trained to stick within for the past 10 years. Have a look at this map of my lifetime Kobo sales. You can see just how much of the world is covered by dots there. Each dot represents a country in which I've sold books on Kobo. The bigger the dot, the more the sales. You can see just how much of the world's covered there. I've sold books in Fiji, Cambodia, Ethiopia, the Turks and Caicos Islands, Bolivia, Nicaragua, Madagascar, and Papua New Guinea, just to mention a few. That sort of worldwide reach is nowhere near possible if you're shackled to Amazon. This is what future-proofing your career is all about. When it comes to going wide, there are some myths and there are some bad advice when it comes to strategy. And there are also some major mistakes that people make, thinking they're doing the right thing when they're actually harming their careers. The first one is constantly coming in and out of KU, or launching books into KU, then taking them wide, or vice versa. This annoys readers. It annoys the retailers, and it really harms what is possibly the biggest underlying factor influencing success in this industry, which is momentum. You need to be building momentum, not constantly slashing it by starting again in the hope of the grass being greener on the other side. You need to pick an approach and stick to it. Many authors and industry commentators like to state that starting off in KU is a great idea because it means you only have one retailer to worry about. And yes, the logic behind that is sound, but the advice itself is poor and will harm your business in the long run. By all means, start out with just Amazon so you get used to publishing and marketing, but don't lock yourself into KU. If you do, you're building an audience of readers which you're then planning to abandon, only to start again from scratch building a new one once you go wide. Ensure you're cultivating only readers who will actually pay for your books. Make sure they're the ones you're finding. Start with Amazon by all means, absolutely. They are the biggest. It's absolutely worth starting with them if you only want to get used to one retailer when you're at the start of your publishing career, but there is no need to tick that KDP Select box. This way, when you're comfortable adding in more retailers, they will provide you with additional income, and you won't be starting again. You won't be losing or hemorrhaging an audience of readers you've already built. Quite the opposite, you'll actually be adding to it. Another myth is that you need to wait for your KDP Select period to end. It's often believed that because Amazon says it's locking you into KDP Select for rolling 90-day periods, that you need to wait until your current 90 days are up before you can go wide. But that's not the case. If you contact Amazon and ask them to let you out of KDP Select, that'll often happen the same day, sometimes within the hour. It's far more flexible than Amazon like to make out in their T's and C's. There are lots of terms and conditions they have which seem quite restrictive, but in reality aren't policed, and Amazon actually are a pretty flexible company and will be willing to help you out if you ask them. Many writers also worry that the day they go wide, their page read income will suddenly dry up. And that's not the case either. I haven't been in KU for nearly 5 years, but I still get page read income all the time. And that's because people will have borrowed my books when they were in KU, and they're only now getting round to reading them. It will start to tail off from the moment you go wide because you'll lose those instant readers, but the ones who borrowed your books before you went wide will still pay out. So I'm going to move on now to some tips for wide success. The approach is more holistic than it is with Amazon, and this is why I'm starting with a tip for keeping retailers happy. This also applies to keeping the readers on those other retailers happy, but it's absolutely crucial to bear in mind. The other retailers have much more human control over what goes on, and they aren't as algorithm driven as Amazon is. It's a far more personal experience, and you need to be able to harness that effectively. For example, Apple Books have a set of guidelines and recommendations on their website which they ask you to follow. This includes things like only using their approved logos and imagery, mentioning them before other retailers, and a whole host of other things that they like authors to do. Now this is all well worth paying attention to, as the Apple Books team do look for this stuff, and they do reward authors who are willing to play ball and work in partnership with them. Think also about the user experience. For example, the cutoff point where your product description goes to read more will differ on each of the retailers. Make sure you're aware of that, and that your product pages are tailored to each retailer in a way which makes the most of that retailer's page layout. When it comes to international pricing, you've got a lot to keep your eye on when you go wide. Apple, Kobo and Google Play operate worldwide, and I mean worldwide. There are a lot of authors who will just set their price in dollars or maybe dollars and pounds, and will allow the retailer to do the currency conversion and not set their own individual pricing for each individual territory. As a reader based in the UK, if I come across a book on Amazon or Kobo or anywhere else, for example, and I see it priced at, let's say, £2.16, I know the author has set that price in dollars and just thought, you know what, I'll let Kobo, I'll let Amazon convert that for the UK market. The UK market's not something I'm bothered about. I'm mainly focusing on the US, and everything else can just fit in around that. In that case, my first thought is, I'm not bothered about you either then. If you're not after my business, if you're not trying to get me as a reader, and I'm just an afterthought for you, then I'm not interested in following you as an author. And I know a lot of readers think along the same lines. Even for the ones who don't, Psychological pricing still comes into play. There are reasons that prices are usually set to end in 0.99, 99p or 99 cents. That's because it works. It sells more products. It's always been the case. Always make sure your pricing is set individually for each country. And while you're there, please take some time to have a look at pricing conventions and cultural norms in those countries. For example, some countries have cultural norms where certain numbers are seen as lucky or unlucky, and you don't want to be falling foul of having a culturally awkward price showing on your product page, because that could cost you sales in the long run. So take China, for example. There, the number 8 is considered to be auspicious, the number 4 is considered to be bad luck. And that's because when you speak Chinese, if you say the number 4, it sounds a lot like their word for death. In Japan, the number 4 is bad luck there too, as is the number 9. So do your research, make sure you're taking full advantage of these subtle cultural differences, because it can have quite a deep psychological impact on whether people are actually going to buy those books or not. None of these things are going to suddenly double your sales overnight, but each of them will give you a small incremental increase, a small advantage over others, and will ensure that you grow your sales over time. Please also make sure you customize your back matter. There is nothing more infuriating for me as a Kobo reader to get to the end of the book and find out the links to buy the next book in the series take me to Amazon, or ask me to leave an Amazon review, even though I bought the book from Kobo and I'm reading it on my Kobo device. Apple, for example, won't even let you mention Amazon in your book. They'll delist it if you do. You need to get your head out of the Amazon sphere and ensure that your back matter is tailored to each retailer. If you use Vellum, this is dead simple, because Vellum can create customized back matter at each retailer for you. When it comes to working directly with retailers, the author experience really doesn't get any better than with Kobo. They're a company I genuinely love working with, both as an author and a reader, and it's easy to see why they're the most popular platform outside of the US and the UK. They're also the only platform which gives authors direct access to on-site promotions through this promotions tab here. Now, this is only available if you go direct to Kobo through Kobo Writing Life. Draft Digital and other aggregators do have access to some promotional opportunities, some of which might even be exclusive to them, but they will differ from these main ones, and you won't usually have the same level of control. If you already publish via Kobo Writing Life and you don't have this option in your menu, don't worry, just email writinglife@kobo.com and the team will get that set up for you. I won't go into too much detail about it, mostly because it's already pretty self-explanatory once you get onto this page, but you can see here that I've already got an active promo due to start shortly on my book Absolution, which I co-wrote with Stephen Moore, as well as 37 promos I've been turned down for over the years, pardon me, and the 135 which I was accepted for and which have run successfully. Some of them you'll pay a small amount up front for, so you can see here £6 for a week's placement on these, £3 for this one. So normally not too expensive. Editor's picks there for £30. And others will be in exchange for a percentage of additional royalties earned off the back of the promo. So you can't really go wrong there. You've got here 10%, so any that are sold through this promo, you will give up an extra 10% of your royalties to Kobo in return for being included in that promotional placement. And you can see here the requirements that you need for each of them. There are homepage placements. You can pay £50 to get the coveted daily deal spot on their homepage. Lots of different deals there. So have a scroll through and see what is applicable to you and your books. So that email address again, if you don't already have access to the promotions tab, is writinglife@kobo.com. And it's worth saying that even these pay for placements, promo opportunities, will give you far more exposure for your books at a far cheaper price than, say, Facebook advertising or even BookBub ads. On which note, over the past 4 or 5 years, I've spent around $500,000 on Facebook ads, so I've come to know what works and what doesn't work. And when you're wide, your approach to Facebook ads will need to differ a little. And again, this all comes from changing your mindset and coming out of that US, UK, Amazon bubble. Facebook has more than 1 billion users all over the world. Even if every American and British citizen was on Facebook, the non-US and UK share would still be more than 3 times the size of it. Facebook allows you to target users from every country and territory in the world. Have a look at those other territories and advertise to them. I should point out, not only are other territories often, for the most part, far less price sensitive than the US and the UK, but Facebook ads do tend to be a lot cheaper outside of the UK and especially the US, where most people are looking to advertise. So generally speaking, the other ones tend to get ignored, relatively speaking anyway. So you do get your ads shown more easily, more cheaply. The clicks are cheaper, so your profit margin in those other countries will be much higher. And this makes the whole business of independent publishing far more sustainable. It's much, much easier to be a big fish in a smaller pond, and bear in mind that pond is still absolutely enormous, than it is to try to squeeze a few cents of profit out of Amazon in the US. Make sure your ads link to all of your retailers, and bear in mind the dominant retailer in that country. For example, if you're sending ads to Canada, don't make the button link go to Amazon in Canada. Amazon's a relatively minor player in Canada. Use Kobo as your main button link there, or even perhaps Chapters for paperbacks. Add links to all the retailers like I've done in this ad here. In the early days of Facebook advertising, I had a huge number of people commenting on there saying, is this only on Amazon? Can I get it somewhere else? So that question is answered there before they can even ask it. You could also perhaps link to a universal book linking service such as D2D's Books to Read, or perhaps even Genius links. Also consider making your main ad destination your book's product page on your own website. This has got some advantages and some drawbacks. It will mean that some users will drop off. It will lower your conversion rate because they'll have an extra click to get to their final destination, but it gives you the advantage of being able to harness Facebook pixel data and retarget those warm leads again in the future with other ads. You could even do your own research into which vendors and retailers are the biggest in each territory by tracking which retailers they click through to from your website. Passing the users through your own site opens up a whole wealth of possibilities when it comes to data analysis and future marketing. Now this is a big one, BookBub. I touched on this earlier in the session actually, but BookBub ads really do open up a whole new world when you go wide. I've done a huge amount of testing with BookBub ads, and I'm also one of the first to test their new features before they launch, so I've seen firsthand what's possible. And there's so much more good stuff to come too, I can tell you that. First of all, they allow you to directly reach readers on other platforms. You can target, for example, Linda LaPlante readers on Kobo. You can target Jeffrey Deaver fans who read on Apple devices, or people who read Bella Andre's books on Google Play. The granular level of detail you can go into when targeting makes BookBub ads extraordinarily powerful as a marketing tool. Readers on the other platforms are far less bargain hungry as well, even when they find you through BookBub. The perception of quality is much higher on other platforms, and you'll find that readers are often more willing to pay money and take a punt than they would be on Amazon, when they're frankly flooded by the sheer choice over there. But first of all, BookBub featured deals are still the best way to find large, wide audiences of readers quickly. They are much, much easier to get if you're wide with all retailers, because BookBub likes to give its readers choice. Books in Kindle Unlimited are less likely to be selected for featured deals. And what's more, the tails from those featured deals tend to last much, much longer on some of the other retailers. And read-through is generally much higher too. More on BookBub in just a moment actually. We're going to have a look at audio. Even 18 months ago, the thought of releasing audiobooks through anywhere other than ACX seemed, frankly, balmy. Audible had a stranglehold on the market for such a long time, it seemed inconceivable that anyone else could break through. But we always knew that if they did, and if they did it properly, it would blow the market apart. And that's what happened. Many authors have been seeing their ACX or Audible income dwindling in the past year or so. And that's because many people are jumping ship to other retailers such as Chirp, iBooks, Biblioteca and Apple. The only real way to access these markets is through Findaway Voices. It's certainly the best way to do it anyway, and it allows you to set your own audio pricing as well as organising direct promotions with retailers. When BookBub launched Chirp, which is effectively BookBub featured deals for audiobooks, it blew the market apart. I went wide immediately because I saw what was coming, and in the year since I did that, my income from audiobooks has gone up more than 330%, and it's still rising. Audible is now my 5th largest audio retailer. 4 new retailers have overtaken it and are now bigger than Audible for me. And many other authors are saying exactly the same thing. Over the past few months, I've also been helping BookBub test their new audio ads, which they'll be launching very soon. This allows you to set up BookBub ads for your audiobooks, sent only to audiobook customers, and they can be extremely lucrative. Trust me, there is nothing else like it out there. This needs your audiobooks to be on Chirp though, which means going wide and going through Findaway Voices. The potential benefits of this are huge. I mean, let's look at it from a logical perspective. BookBub is where you create your audio ad. It then sends users to Chirp to buy your audiobook. That's also a BookBub company. BookBub knows exactly which readers click your ads and go on to buy your books. You have oversight of the entire process, and a little birdie tells me that a future iteration of the audio ads dashboard will actually show you how many sales each ad has produced and whether or not they're profitable at a glance. And that is something that isn't possible with anything else. Even AMS is massively unreliable on this front. It will give authors a level of control over their audiobook marketing and advertising that has been nowhere near possible up until now. I would say still do have your audiobooks through ACX, but not exclusive. Go direct also to Kobo. You can now upload audiobooks directly to Kobo. That will open up a whole host of new marketing and promotional opportunities through their dashboards, and use Findaway Voices for the others. Well, I hope you've found this session on selling more books wide useful. It struck me in planning this session that it was either going to be around half an hour or 100 hours and nowhere in between. As anyone who's gone wide will know, you can easily end up down a rabbit hole and get into some really fine, granular detail on any of the topics we've covered today, from speaking to retailers, tailoring your product pages, Kobo promotions, Facebook ads, BookBub, going wide with your audiobooks. There's a huge amount that can be done when you're wide, but that's not to say you need to do it all. It really doesn't need to be scary or daunting. In the same way, it doesn't need to be scary or daunting if, say, you wanted to learn to play football, and your introduction to that is to watch Germany playing Brazil in the World Cup final. And we all start somewhere, and having a kickabout in your local park is still playing the exact same sport. So don't overload your brain and worry too much about all the things you have to do. You don't have to. They're things you can do, and which will probably help you to sell more books. If you're keen to learn more, I do have a series of Indie Author Mindset mini courses available at courses.indieauthormindset.com. As an ally member, you're entitled to a massive 50% discount on all of my courses. Just enter the promo code ALLY at the checkout to claim that. And please do come and join my completely free Indie Author Mindset group on Facebook. It's a group focused on long-term organic success and learning to treat your writing career as a business, as is the fairly new now Indie Author Mindset podcast, a weekly podcast in 15-minute bite-sized chunks to help give you some motivation, some boosts and some tips for your publishing career each week. So have a look for the Indie Author Mindset podcast on your favourite podcast app. Thank you very much for joining me for this session, and I hope to see you very soon.